Right, same colour bishops, and I've got three games to go through involving various different themes. This first one's a game from 1947, white to play. It's Avabaka versus Veresov, and it's just really, black's got a bad bishop. We've already got one pawn fixed on a light square. We've got light square bishops each, and white's first move is fairly clear, I'd say. Just fix more pawns on light squares. So that's what Avabaka did. He played h4, and Veresov came back to d7 with the bishop. And something I sort of feel like I struggle with in my games is sometimes I don't think I have a plan. I'm fine for playing moves like h4, just sort of mini plans, sort of principled moves, basically. Sort of like fixing my opponent's pawns on light squares, but I sometimes don't have like a long-term plan. And you read these textbooks and it comes across like these people have this long-term plan. I've seen that idea criticised as well, this idea that there was always this grand plan, and a lot of it's a bit retrospective, and actually half the time these top players are also just using mini plans. But Dvoretsky talks about this particular game in the endgame manual as white's got a plan. Something that struck me about this position and the way that this game sort of unfolded was the do not hurry principle in endgames. So that was important. Anyway, the first thing Avabaka did was bring the bishop round and attack the e4 pawn. And I suppose that's just a mini plan, isn't it? Sort of a sensible thing to do. Attack the e4 pawn along that diagonal. By the way, that was a pretty sensible move by Veresov, wasn't it? Just putting a pawn on a dark square. I mean, when you sort of hear the plan, it kind of becomes a bit unclear who wants to swap the queenside pawns, because part of white's plan is going to be to create a passed pawn on the queenside, and yet black's plan is to swap as many pawns as possible, just generally. Not thinking about whether it's the queen side or the king side. Weirdly, black would probably want to swap the king side pawns here, even though that the promotion square of this one is the opposite colour to the bishops, which seems like it would be in the defending side's favour. Anyway, a5 and bishop g2, and we've attacked the pawn on e4. The first thing to note straight away, bishop f5, and we see the zugzwang theme appearing straight away. So zugzwang's sort of a very important thing in same coloured bishop endgames. We've done a whole video on zugzwang in same colour bishop endgames, the way you can sort of use it as a tool in a position where you've got a massive advantage. And here it's worked straight away. Okay, so black's either going to lose the e4 pawn or the king's moving somewhere, and this king is just brilliantly placed. You do not want to move that king as a defender. So bishop f5, clearly a bad move, and bishop c6 was played instead. But that allows the white bishop to the h3 to c8 diagonal. And Dvoretsky talks about the plan being to get the bishop to d7, where it's going to support this queenside advance of the pawns. We're going to create a passed pawn on the queen side, use it to take the king offside, and then come to e8, gobble up these two pawns, and after all that messing about, we'll have these two against this one. It's going to be a clear win. That's the plan. And I guess when you put it like that, it's sort of, you think, well, could I have a plan like that? I mean, you can have a plan and then plans are forced to change, but black's actually got a very neat little defensive move in the middle of all of this, which was played in the game and also played in one of the variations as well, one of the analysis variations. Let's just sort of see how that plan might take place if black just sort of defends passively. Bishop a8. You think, why all the way back to a8? Why not b7? It's just like, well, after bishop d7, you want to put it on b7. White starts creating that passed pawn on the queen side. Black just waits, there is the passed pawn created on the queen side. And now this is the bit where black could come over with the king. And then, okay, black king's gone offside. We'll attack the pawns. So when black takes on c5, we might see these sorts of moves. These two connected passed pawns, they're just going to be too strong. This pawn's probably falling in a minute anyway. I mean, the engine's got that as plus 35, and I can't see... I personally don't think I'd have any problem whatsoever converting that, so I'm happy enough with that one. However, back in this position, what black could do, and Veresov did this in the game, is this idea, well, I don't have to take on c5 straight away. If I'm losing my kingside pawns anyway, why not push the pawn? And in fact, white has only one winning move here. You've got to take it. You've got to take that pawn, and then we could see something like king takes c5. Check this move out, bishop g6. Okay. The only reason that white can still win this game, even though this clever idea of g5, so that white's really only got one pawn on the g file now. Like, if you think about it, the black king just needs to get to g7, and it's a draw. You know, and it would be a draw after bishop takes h5, king d6. That black king, I don't think you can stop the black king getting to g7, and then black just moves his bishop around all day. So you think, okay, what's so good about not taking the pawn on h5, bishop g6? All right, you take the e-pawn rather than the h-pawn. It's not about taking the e-pawn necessarily, although that's actually a pawn you want to get, obviously, because it's passed, whereas the h-pawn's being held up by g3. And it's being held up on a light square, g3 can't be touched. It's not about the pawn, it's about, if black doesn't move his bishop now, it's getting swapped next go, and the resultant king and pawn ending is 1. So that's pretty clever. So black has to move the bishop. You take on e4, and then you're threatening the bishop swap anyway. The bishop has to move, and then your king comes in. So white kind of gained 2, possibly 3 tempi there, with including, taking the pawn, and yeah, the king's in. That's going to be you can see that's clearly a win. Okay, we're going to escort the pawn to g7 quite happily, and then it's an incredibly short diagonal where our king's going to be on h6, guarding one of those 2 squares, possibly even getting to h8. Okay. So, yeah, I mean, that's just some example things that could happen after bishop h3. So in the game, Veresov played b5. Again, it's not really clear who that was to the advantage of. Black wants to swap pawns, sure, but white wants to create a passed pawn on the queen side, which Avabaka now did. Sorry, back in this position, bishop takes b5. The bishop came to c8. Bishop c6 back to stop an attack on the e-pawn. But the attack on the e-pawn is going to sort of happen anyway after the swap of the pawns here. If black's not careful, white can move the bishop to a6 to escort the pawn all the way to b7. So bishop b5 played to presumably stop that. Bishop b7. Yeah, and what does black now do? I mean, if the e-pawn gets defended, we see bishop c6 escorting the pawn. Okay, so black might sort of give up at this point, by the way. So not they've got much choice, as in trying to stop the queenside pawn and just basically admit defeat now. This bishop is going for this pawn, and then the king just says, okay, right, I'll come for your kingside pawns instead. b5, a couple of tries here. One is just to take the pawn straight away, just sack the bishop, and it's looking good. What are we going to do there? Because after king f2, we've got this e3 check move, but the bishop's guarding e2, so that's fine. So the bishop sack doesn't work. Instead of going for the kingside pawn straight away, b6, that threatens b7, so bishop a6 is forced. King f2, there's the e3 check idea again, king g2. And if e2, well, a clever idea that White's got here is bishop f3 check, force the king back off the g4 square, and then just take on e2. That bishop, of course, can't be taken. And we might be thinking, well, you don't have to just lose your e-pawn like that. What if black just plays a waiting move? It's like, well, okay, what waiting move? Maybe something like bishop c8. And then you just push the b-pawn, takes, and we can come back to f3 check anyway. So those sorts of plans don't work. And hence, in this position, in the game, Veresov found that same idea. Okay, g5. And incredibly, again, White has only got one winning move, and it's not this. It's not h takes g5 this time, because king f5, that g-pawn's going, black's fine. So instead of that, bishop takes e4. And so we're going to see a swap of h-pawns. And I mean, this is plus 6.3, but it's just sort of incredible, really, isn't it? All black wants to do is like lose the bishop for this pawn and get the king to the corner, but it just can't be achieved. You know, if the king comes over to help stop the b pawn, the white king and bishop can win that and escort this pawn very happily without the black bishop getting to it. If the black king sort of doesn't come and sort out the b pawn, then this white king and bishop will be able to get this pawn through against this bishop very happily. They're just too far apart, the pawns, and it's just very hard for black to deal with. I mean, the king's in a great place again. So I don't know. Let's say bishop e8 is another try. Okay, there's a bit of sort of manoeuvring around that White can do. So bishop f3, sort of we're guarding that square, but we're also still attacking h5. King across to f5, for example. Bishop e2. King back to e5, bishop d3, just a little bit of manoeuvring. Bishop d7, because the h-pawn's not attacked, but then we can attack it from g6. And yeah, I mean, the b-pawn was getting pushed there. If bishop g4, the b-pawn was getting pushed anyway, so the black king comes over. Bishop takes h5. And this is a nice little line, just to demonstrate, just an example of how the black king's just out of it. H5, bishop f5. And now we can guard the h7 square supported by a king from behind. So the black bishop's got to move. h6, sorry, bishop g8 to stop h7 and king to d4. And that plan is unstoppable. I mean, there's nothing particularly special about bishop e8. It was just, it was just another bishop move, still guarding the b5 square. So bishop a4 was played in the game. Pawn got attacked straight away. Bishop d1 defended it, and then pushed the b pawn. King has to come over. King c5, king g5. If the pawn's taken, bishop takes h5 leads to a win. Reasonably straightforward win, in fact, because the black king's just too far away. So black tried in the game bishop e2. You could pause the video here if you want and work out what should you do here as white. It's instructive. It's a little tactic, tempo gaining maneuver that's absolutely essential. You've got to use it here. Bishop takes h5. Doesn't do it. This would be a draw. Because after bishop takes h5, black can take the b pawn with the bishop, and then the black king is close enough to getting back in time. I mean, the black bishop there went to e8, by the way, in that position. Bishop e8. Obviously, we can't push the h-pawn. We've got to get the bishop to the g6 square. And draw. Black could be cheeky and play king f8 there. Which is, I mean, king takes e8 is obviously a draw, but king f8 is also a draw. So yeah, you can't take the pawn straight away. So the tactic, sort of tempo-gaining maneuver, got to be aware of it. It's a nice little thing to know in same colour bishop end games. is that this bishop is sort of perfectly placed. So you can just put black in zugzwang. Okay. If the bishop moves on this diagonal, we take on h5. Okay. And the bishop can no longer take the pawn, and the king can't take the pawn either because the bishop's being attacked. So the bishop has to move, and then back to e8 is just 2 pawns, black's dead. If the bishop moves on this diagonal, we can play king takes pawn. So the bishop can't move, which forces king b6, because black's got to keep an eye on the b6 square. And that's the one vital extra tempo that's needed to win this. See, I really like that. I thought it was sort of instructive. We had fixing pawns. We had do not hurry was something that struck me about the whole thing. The idea of actually coming up with a plan rather than just a series of mini plans. Although I don't know how much I believe there was always a grand plan. I think there's a little bit of retrospectively claiming there was. That's what I like to tell myself, for the fact these guys have got plans and I haven't. There was this g5 defensive trick to be on the lookout for. It's always, it's always worth thinking about changing the pawn structure by sacking pawns that you're going to get lost anyway. I mean, sacking pawns for positional advantage in opposite colour bishop endgames is absolutely a thing, but it looks like it's also not a bad idea in same colour bishop endgames. The two different lines we looked at, g5, one of them had to be taken for white to win, and the other one had to be left for white to win. What else did we like? I liked the sort of the finesse at the end there. Bishop e8 is the only winning move. And I also quite enjoyed in that position where was it? See if I can find it. I think it was there, wasn't it? Yeah. White's got a choice here between taking on h5. Well, I've got a choice of lots of things, really. But taking h5 doesn't work. Bishop g6, taking advantage of the fact that the black bishop's on a8. So I quite like that as well. I thought that there was loads of instructive stuff in that game. And nice to see how, we went from this position and Avabaca just calmly converted it with that nice little finesse, bishop e8 finesse at the end. It went all the way here and then, yeah, black resigned there. Right, next. This is a game from 1979. Garry Kasparov, nobody less, is black, and won this game by playing first of all g6, which looks like a pretty good move because white sort of has to concede ground almost straight away. Like the bishop can't leave the guarding of e1. So it's kind of a zugzwang. Again, zugzwang appearing straight away. Just notice how horrendous this bishop is, by the way. No. That's a dreadful bishop. So king back to e2, bishop to c5, and then weirdly the game now went bishop takes c5, so it went into a king and pawn ending, which Kasparov just sort of converted with ease. I mean, weirdly, the engine's saying minus 2.3 there. It reckons we should play. There's some sort of subtlety around king e3, which I don't want to get into in a same colour bishops video. But this is how the game ended, and there's just a sort of widening the beachhead thing going on. It was probably an opposition type thing, wasn't it? That meant king e3, but it was still lost apparently. And white resigned. Okay, but if we go back to this position, where white should absolutely not have exchanged bishops, although this bishop's bad, it's actually a bit of a, not quite a fortress, but it's quite hard for black to break this down. If king e4, bishop a5, I mean, what's black's plan? Okay. And if b4, Okay, we're going to see this idea in another endgame in a minute. It's like, all right, yeah, you just fixed your own pawn on the same colour as your bishop. But there is also something to be said for restricting the mobility of the opponent's bishop. It's not always a case of you've got to just always, don't follow it like a religion. I must not have my pawns on dark squares. They must all be on light squares. There's enough dreadful pawnage going on over here with this bishop already being horrendous that just the odd pawn on the dark square, especially if it restricts the mobility of the defending bishop, which it does massively here, b4 is a great move. And an example line would be like bishop d2, king into e4, and white's just sort of slowly in a zugzwang mess. Defend the b pawn, bishop back to d2, bishop d4, bishop e1, bishop e3. Or if bishop c1, this is quite nice actually, I like this. Bishop c3, bishop e3. You could pause the video here. What would you play here as black? How about that? Bishop e1. Okay. Tactics come about from big positional advantages, and that's a massive positional advantage. I remember seeing that sort of bishop for bishop swap tactic idea, just to manoeuvre your king into a different place in opposite coloured bishop endgames. But it's worked here as well. So yeah, b4, and what was so good about this bishop e1 idea? Well, actually, white's just got the simple king f3 here, and we're stopping the king coming in here, we're stopping the king coming in here, and we're stopping the king coming in here. The black king would have to go back to d5. We could either just come back to e1 and just repeat, or I'm trying to work out whether that pawn ending is... looks like the pawn ending might be drawn. I might be wrong on that. We just take on c5 and do that. Can't see how black's breaking through immediately. I might be wrong about that. But yeah, this was a defense. So, all right. So what did Kasparov do wrong then? Because g6 seems like a very sensible move, certainly a very natural move, and white played king e2. Exchange of bishops was offered, and bishop e1. It's actually very hard for black to win that. So what's the winning plan from the original position? And the idea apparently should have been undermining, which is something we should look out for in same colour bishop endings. So although there's just like ridiculous numbers of bad pawns, sometimes there's just too many bad pawns, and it's fine to chop a couple of them off, just to give yourself a bit more space. If king e2, king e4, and you can see black's advantage straight away. So it has to be a bishop move, or possibly this pawn move, a3. So it can't be a bishop move, sorry, because it allows onto that diagonal again. So yeah, just a waiting move with the bishop. A3, bishop back to d8, and then white's kind of got no choice really but just to push pawns at that stage. And more pawns fixed on dark squares. Undermining, bishop into c5, and then fixing the pawn on a3. So this could always be a long-term weakness. I mean, there's even ideas later on of a bishop being sacked on b4 if everything's over on the king side. Bishop back to d4, then g6. The bishop's kind of got to stay on this diagonal, otherwise the black bishop's going to get in on b6, and it's just going to be a horrible zugzwang thing. But then we see f6, and the bishop's sort of going to get in anyway. That has to be taken. Bishop takes f6. That's now being threatened. So bishop back to c1, bishop d4. Ugh, horrible. What does white do here? So just getting that little bit of extra space for the bishop, and that was the winning plan. So yeah, loads of good stuff in that game. And then finally, this is a game from 1986. It's white to play. This one's less about a plan and more almost back to the Zugzwang idea that I covered. I mean, there is a variation of this that was the Zugzwang, one of the positions I did in that Zugzwang video. And it's almost like a tree of what if analysis, like it's almost like the opposite of a grand plan and just a series of mini plans. I'll put my bishop here, and then if he does this, I'll do this, and black just eventually runs out of options. Notice that, I mean, black's obviously got a horrendous position with these pawns fixed on dart squares, and alright, this one isn't fixed on a dart square yet, but white's just going to keep manoeuvring around until black runs out of moves, basically. So it kicks off with bishop e1, maintaining an attack on the a5 pawn. And then straight away, black has to defend that. Bishop c7 would see bishop c3, Zugzwang. Okay. At that point, black would be forced to play g5. And then I actually covered this in my Zugzwang video, or the video on Zugzwang, and I beat Stockfish on level 8 from here. I came up with a plan. I took my bishop to f2, and I don't want to go into detail again, but I put my bishop on f2, at which point the black bishop had to go to d8, and then I went bishop c5. Stockfish actually then came bishop b6 at that stage. I didn't realise it at the time, but that's actually one of the variations covered in the book, but in a similar, I'll show you in a minute, and a different way to win that queen and pawn ending that I didn't think about. I mean, I won it, but it was a different way to do it. Anyway, so bishop c7 not possible, bishop b6, and then we go bishop h4, and bishop d8's on the cards if black's not careful. So bishop d4, bishop d8, and the a5 pawn can't be defended. So maybe you might see bishop c7, but then we come back and hit the e pawn. Black's got to stay on the e pawn, and then we come and hit the a pawn. Black's got to defend the a pawn. It's either going to come back from d6 to c7, or in this case forward from b8 to c7, and then we're back in the Zugzwang position again. So like black's options are just sort of really limited the whole time. Bishop e3, okay, because then if bishop d8, bishop d2 to defend the a pawn. That was black's last option. So we come back and hit the e pawn. It's worth thinking about bishop f4 here, because that can't be taken straight away. But we see bishop e1, king to b6. That allows the king in. King d5, bishop c3. And you might be able to see where this is going now. Pawn to g5. And then we can swap. And this is going to lead to this exactly as a transposition from the exactly what I did in the Zugzwang video, queen. Now I played queen b5 here, which is a win. I'm pleased to see it. I'd be amazed if it wasn't a win because I beat Stockfish with it. Queen b5 check is checkmate in 24. But I could have played queen e3 check. Which apparently is checkmate in 22. And yeah, the king can't go to the a file because that swaps the queens. The king can't go to b4 or b2 because that swaps the queens. And if the king goes to c2, we have actually transposed now from my queen b5 idea. Queen e2, and if it goes to the first rank, we're going to check and swap the queens. If it goes to c3, queen e5 wins the queen, and if it goes to b3, queen c4, followed by either queen d4 skewer or picking up the queen swap on the a file. So I thought that was quite interesting, sort of a transposition from the same idea of, you know, the black's position so bad that even that queen and pawn ending at the end of it is still winning. Anyway, so bishop f4 not possible, but instead bishop d4 and then a waiting move, bishop h2. What's so good about this waiting move? Well, for example, I mean, black's got to defend this pawn, not from c3, obviously. So bishop a1 would not do it because of bishop g1. And then where's the bishop going to go? It's only got one square. Never mind what it needs to defend, only got one square, b2. Bishop to f2. And black can't stop this. Okay, so not bishop a1. If bishop b2, bishop g1 anyway. Again, black's sort of running out of squares. I mean, a1's obviously very silly. If it goes to c1, then we can play bishop c5 and bishop d2, bishop back to a3, and this isn't too dissimilar to what I found when the pawn was already on g5. So now we go bishop to b2, and black can't defend the a5 and e5 pawns. Okay, we're going to play almost, well, however black defends this, we'll play bishop c3 next move. And if instead bishop a3, bishop f2, bishop e7, bishop to g3, attack the e pawn, black defends it from f6. If black defends it from d6, we attack the a pawn, bishop c7, bishop c3, the Zugzwang again. Now the corresponding squares, you know, the c7 and c3 correspond. It's like so instructive to watch that you just keep doing these little bishop maneuvers and attacks, and black's always got one move. Black's always treading on eggshells, just one slight wrong move, and it's like, oh no, if you do that, it's just this, then this, and you drop your a pawn, or you ended up in corresponding squares. And it's, yeah. But something else that's really nice about this position is white plays a waiting move, so black has to defend the e-pawn. By the way, in all of this, something I haven't mentioned, which is that the reason black's doing bishop moves the whole time is because any king move is going to let the white king in. That's always been there throughout. So yes, it is always bishop moves. Now, what would you play here as white? Pause the video and have a go at it if you like. What would you do next? Because it's like, you know, we've attacked the a pawn, we've attacked the e pawn, move around in circles, and you know, when black made one little slip, we got the c3, c7 Zugzwang. But when black didn't make that one little slip, it's starting to get to the point of what do we do next? It's defending pretty well. And it's the same sort of idea from that Kasparov game, which is that we don't just religiously never put our pawns on dark squares. It's a great general rule, but sometimes it's actually quite useful to have our pawns on dark squares, especially if it restricts the mobility of the opponent's bishop. We're attacking the e-pawn. Black's got to stay on the defense of the e-pawn, but they've no longer got the f6 square. So they're just going back and forth here. And if bishop h8, indeed, this is just a very easy win. Bishop g3, bishop back to g7, bishop e1, the a-pawn's gone, or the king's coming into d5. So in the actual game, this was a game, by the way, from 1986, black realised this mess and went back to f8, and the e-pawn's gone. And you think, well, it's gone now, isn't it? It's over, and it's not actually over. Incredibly, this e-pawn isn't that strong. So black played bishop e7, which is a good move. Bishop f6, that's also a good move by white. And now black made a decisive mistake by bringing the bishop to b4. Okay. Something simple like bishop c5. I mean, there's a reason bishop b4 is a bad move. But bishop c5, if bishop back to c3, bishop b6. I mean, it's good for white. But it's actually quite hard to realise the advantage of the extra pawn. So bishop f6. Yeah, and the reason bishop b4 is bad is that bishop c3 now wins the a pawn. Okay, or rather, it swaps the a pawn for the g pawn. Because, yeah, black obviously can't swap bishops. But even in this position, instead of playing bishop c3, white had a chance to go wrong. Like in a game, you've just won the e-pawn, so you might think, oh, well, that's great, I've won the e-pawn, now let's use it to my advantage, let's push my passed pawn. That's got to be winning, right? It's not, that's just 0.0 all the way down. Bishop d2, e6, king across, e7, king d7. White's got nothing. White's got absolutely nothing. There is just no way to make progress there. But thankfully, bishop b4 was played, and I suppose thankfully e5 wasn't played. Instead, bishop c3 was played. Bishop back to e7, and then we saw the pawn swap, and then here comes the b pawn. Black clears, but puts the bishop on a very sensible diagonal, restricting this pawn, and ultimately the white pawn may be getting to b8, the principle of one diagonal. But white's pawns are just faster. That's also a very sensible diagonal to get the e-pawn moving. g5. And you have to be careful of the tactics here. You have to think about, again, the resultant pawn ending on e5 check. And there's some nice stuff in this resultant pawn ending, if the swap happened. What would you play here as white? White has only one winning move, which needed to be spotted back there. Okay. What is white's only one winning move in this position? If you played king c5, bad luck. King e6 is now a draw. Because white's going to have to play one more king move to shoulder the black king away from d7. White's queening first, sure, but b8 queen is no longer arriving with check. So king c5, king e6 would be a draw. But b6 does win. Well done if you play b6. King comes across, king b5, pawn gets pushed, king a6, g3, and again white's queening with check. It was always going to be check because the black king had to come back on this diagonal. It was the only path back to stop the passed pawn. Anyway, so both players worked that out. Whoever was playing white worked that out and played e5 check, and whoever was playing black worked that out and didn't take it. King c7, and yeah, it just starts to look a bit desperate at this particular point. King's in. I mean, the g-pawn gets pushed, so you have to be a little bit worried about these things. It's like, well, that's getting quite close to g1 now, should we care? And then just the cool king c6 at this stage. So the bishop has to stop the e-pawn because e7 was threatened, and then b6. And black resigned because that's happening next move with, well, I suppose it's checkmate, isn't it? I can't see how black avoids a checkmate. It's checkmate in 10. I'm amazed it's as much as that. So king d8 apparently we can run away into a checkmate in 10. Yeah, loads going on in that endgame. Anyway, those are 3 different same colour bishop endgames, punishing bad bishops. I hope you found them useful.